Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we shine a spotlight on stories about local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the United States and around the world. My name is John Cross. I am the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing tonight?
Doing all right. Good to be back. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's a nice welcome distraction from the rest of the world, because things are a little
Very
crazy
much
right
so.
now. One of the things I wanted to get into right away, because we're going to spend most of this pod talking about the Open Cup. But before we do, there was some big news that broke. There were rumors of it happening when we had our podcast last Tuesday. Although I think I mentioned on the pod the previous week, because of all the stuff going on in the world, I did not stay up with a lot of the soccer news, and I certainly wasn't tuned in that day before our podcast, and didn't start hearing the rumors till Tuesday night, and then the official announcement that came from USL on Wednesday morning that a super majority of owners from USL League One and the Championship voted to implement Pro Rel on the men's side when they launch their Division One league. So, Dylan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have more thoughts than I think we could reasonably fit into an episode, but I'll hit on some key things. First and foremost, the thing that jumps out at me is the supermajority. That tells me that a lot of the USL owners, not unanimous, but a lot of them are on the same page, which is good, because that was always a feeling I got when I was a little more plugged into the USL spaces. But a supermajority being on the same page is like not a joke. That means an organization is moving in a certain direction and they are, laying plans to do so. So that was something that definitely caught my ear. But the other thing is a little more kind of me just kind of extrapolating beyond the idea. But I am curious to see if they haven't already, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they start laying out the specifics for how many teams will be in each league, because they're going to need to expand at some point. And I'm kind of curious how they go about doing that process, because as it stands now, the USL is still a closed entity, and even with promotion and relegation, it still will be. But it will need to find a way to fill out those lower leagues, and I'm kind of curious to see how they do that. So there's one kind of reaction and one kind of thought going forward for you.
Right, and I agree with you in terms of the supermajority. I don't know how many of the stories you had heard and seen. I know Paul McDonough was on from USL, was on quite a few of the soccer podcasts and shows like Golazo, and that was a big thing, right? It was a super majority, but I think their announcement of going to a Division One league last month is what helped set the tone to have this vote, because the reports that I read from a couple of the owners out there is, as we're getting ready to start this USL season, there were owners like you always have you do a kit reveal, you do other things, there's Q&A sessions, and when this idea came up of a Division One league, and then people would ask in the audience questions like, okay, does that mean we're doing Pro Rel soon? And and a couple owners announcing to their supporters that they were in favor of it, and owners reporting back the reaction, the very strong positive reaction they got from those comments. Sounds like what really got the ball moving, with a lot of owners talking about it and thinking this is the right time. And I know you're right. We could go in all kinds of directions and spend an entire episode on this, which I imagine we will a little bit later. But we'll let some of this news, have a chance to filter through the ecosystem a little bit, and more details to come out. Because, like you said, there aren't a lot of details other than they agreed to do it, and they're trying to figure out how to do it, and they've given themselves a roadmap. I think 2028. I saw 2027 at one point, but I think
Well, I think
2028
aren't
is
they
the.
also planning to like switch to coincide with the international calendar as well? Is there some maybe Like it'll be a 27-28 season sort of, I
There was
that.
discussion about this. I've seen some people, in social media comment that the way it was phrased, they're pretty convinced that they will be switching calendars. Um, when I saw an interview, if I'm remembering correctly, with Paul McDonough specifically, he said no, that wasn't on
Okay.
the table as part of the discussions. But you've got a few years here, and I'm sure looking at the success of the USL Super League on the women's side, which is running the more traditional calendar, and seeing how that works, will you know will give them some insight into how it might be able to work on the men's side if they choose to go that direction. But
Well, I want to
go
say
ahead.
too, real quick. Sorry, I just one thought I did have as well as to how one thing I thought about it versus the 2027 versus 2028. Um, One way I've kind of read it as well is so the implementation of promotion and relegation will be the 2027 season, but it will be 2028 that is the first year where teams are promoted and relegated as a result of that 2027 season, if that makes sense. So I don't
Yeah,
know. I might have been misreading that, but that was one kind of interpretation I'd had while reading those sort of various dates that people were talking about.
right. I hadn't heard that one, but I'm sure there's lots of details to be sorted out. And kind of like you had your 2 points. Depends what hat I put on about this
Hmm.
news. My
Right.
my fan hat, stoked. I mean, I couldn't be more excited that there's a league that's going to try this. Right. So in that sense, I just I think about all the potential. I'm already hearing teams talk about it in terms of what we're going to talk about here in the Open Cup, but just the extension of this, how this plays out, and that some of these teams that we're seeing in the Open Cup right now could potentially be moving up through some of these divisions once they institute promotion relegation. If I put on a more analytical, cynical hat, as you mentioned, it's closed league, right? So, I mean, maybe this is what we need to get to a more open pyramid eventually, but they've already said you can't fall out of Division 3, at least in their initial proposal here. So, kind of like you, one of my questions is okay, then how do people get into Division 3? Are you still ultimately buying your way into this league that's just going to control 3 divisions and everybody else is screwed out of the system? And, as a lot of people like to point out, and while I love a lot of things about USL, they're a closed league like MLS. You still have to have buy-in. There's still territorial rights. There's all these things that we have to get away from if if we're eventually going to move to an open pyramid. And maybe USL just keeps extending it down, but then
That's
they're still
yeah.
controlling it. We still have leagues against leagues and it's not truly an open system. So in the long run, I really hope this is a push to have eventually a truly open system. And personally, I don't care whether Major League Soccer becomes a part of it or not. I care, and I don't know that they will, but I care that USL be good stewards about this, that it could then be implemented, you know, throughout that we could have a true open pyramid. We're so far away from that being a reality, but it's nice to have something concrete that we're actually moving towards and not the last decade of teases that USL has been doing. I mean, I guess you could argue this is still a tease because it hasn't happened, but there's been a vote and they're actively working towards it. So right
Yeah.
now I'm going to take that win. We'll wait and see how everything plays out.
Yeah, and I think too, if you look at both the history of some of the more established leagues around the world and also some of the more recent history of some of the more fledgling leagues around the world and maybe newer countries or reformed countries, you see a lot of different strategies towards building out that pyramid, right? Um, and so I maybe this is naive, but I feel optimistic and confident that a move in this direction will only be a positive feedback loop because as you create this drama, people get more interested, which gives you the opportunity to expand and people get more interested. But I do think as you mentioned, they'll have to do away or severely modify things like the territorial rights. Something I've really thought about, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, when the Division One announcement came out about a month or two ago. There's going to have to be either a modification or waiver to the PLS, the professional league standards, for that to happen realistically. And this, talk of promotion and relegation kind of further makes me think that a change or waiver to the PLS is coming, because I would feel like USL would have assurances before they're diving in on all of this stuff. I mean, you would hope. Anyway, I'm getting off topic a little bit. My point being, though, I feel as if this is a thing that if they can get this right, even though it is a closed system and there's territory rights, we'll start to chip away at those things with this foundation underneath us if we can do it right.
Right, I agree. And with we'll talk about this in another episode. Like, how do you build out a pyramid in the U.S. and what are some of the logistical hurdles that you need to be aware of if you want to try to make a pyramid like this? So that's something that we already have kind of penciled in for a later episode. The professional league standards also is something, as you said, going to have to be modified in some way. It can't exist exactly the way it is. It's going to have to change at some point. It's really going to be interesting to see how, if they do at all, how MLS responds. Because one of my biggest critiques of Major League Soccer, besides their single entity structure, is everything is commercialized and corporatized. And that's pretty much how we do it in the United States. I mean, this is every professional league. Right? There's nothing unusual about it, but it is way more about the owners and the owners' investment than it is about community. And one of the things I think USL has done a very good job is trying to get their teams to connect with their communities. And I think they have done a good job. There's passionate fan bases at pretty much every USL club. And when you connect with your community, you have a much stronger team. And I think all the people, one of the criticisms, it's always financial about promotion and relegation. Yeah, it's great if you go up, but it'll devastate you and your team will be destroyed if you go down. Well, it won't if your team is about community. If your team is about your community is still going to be there. We see it around the world. If it's only there to deal in commodities, you treat your fans like commodities and your players like commodities. If it's just there for the owners and an investment, and that's it, then yeah, those fans will probably go because they're not connected strongly with the team and the team's not connected strongly with the community. That is, and I think in Major League Soccer, you only have a handful of teams. You could probably argue they have strong connections with their communities. And I'd say it's less to do with the team and team owners than it is with the supporters and how the supporters
and I would say
be connected.
That, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel comfortable in saying in all of those cases where you could argue that there is a real connection to the community, it's in spite of MLS because the team and supporters group or supporters base either pre-existed MLS or came from a different place and into MLS, clubs like Orlando or Minnesota, right? Or we're talking Seattle and Portland, which full on predate even the inception of the league. So I would even say that it's very much in spite of the MLS there.
I would agree, and that's something also we'll talk about on a later episode because there's a lot to dig in there, and then I don't want to keep us sidetracked, but I do. At the end of the episode, I'm gonna mention a podcast. We're gonna make a recommendation for people to go listen to. It's just 3 particular episodes that dive into the history of U.S. soccer, because that again is another thing we're going to talk about a little bit later. Okay, I think we've kind of, well, I wouldn't say exhaust because there's a lot to talk about here, and I'm sure there's
not even close.
I'm sure there's a lot of news we're going to be hearing throughout this particular season and over the next couple of years on how this will play out and the structure and how teams come in. So I'm excited to hear some of those news. But now, since we just had the opening week of the Open Cup proper last week. 64 teams, 32 games over, well, technically 4 days. They were supposed to be over 3 days. We had one bump to Friday. But we had the whole first round last week, and we're going to talk a little bit of recap about what happened last week and do a little preview of round two, which comes next week, and talk about some of the highlights and so forth. But one of the things I wanted to get out of the way a little bit is I did not quite understand, and I'm not 100% sure if it was this way last year, because I know around this time last year I was a little busy with some other things, so I didn't follow the Open Cup as closely as I normally do. But I really liked that the first two rounds are kind of tied together. You have the 64 teams in round one, and then all the winners face off against each other in round two, instead of bringing new teams in right away again, which is how it used to be. Because I know when we were both fans of the Loyal, we would wait to see, because we came in round two, so we'd see what happened in round one to find out who we'd be playing. So I really like that they have, I like the structure this way, because if you win, you're kind of playing still within the same group of people. You're not all of a sudden getting another group of potentially stronger teams coming in. So it gives you a chance to make a little deeper run and maybe build some confidence when you do take on some of the big boys that
So
will
it's
be coming
round
in the later rounds.
it's round 3 where the seeded USL Championship and the MLS teams come in, right?
No, round three will be the seeded USL teams will come in.
Okay.
And then we go to the round of 32. So we're going to kind of be sticking at this 32 teams thing for a little bit. Then the MLS teams will come in the round of 32, and each of those 16 MLS teams that come in there will play a lower division opponent in that first round.
Right.
So everybody who makes it through is going to face an MLS team or MLS opposition.
Well, maximize your chance for upsets, I suppose.
Right. So that kind of gets us to our question that we asked last week was, so when we get to that round of 32 and the MLS teams come in, how many teams will make it to how many lower league teams will make it to the round of 16? Now you said 3 to 4.
I think I said 3, yeah.
Yeah. You said 3, I think maybe 4 at best. I said 9, We got some feedback, and they were mostly around, I would say, the 3 to 5 range, maybe a few outliers. Nobody was close to me. I was the only one that said. And I'm sure it's wishful thinking.
It's a little hard when you don't even know what the matchups are, right? It's like...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I said last time, my argument was a little bit that a lot of these MLS teams don't always play their strongest team. It's your chance to play some of your bench players and your younger players and rest some of your normal starters. And then once our episode was finished, I thought about it a little more. I was like, that because of the way this agreement works, which I want to go on the record saying I still don't like, because I think every single MLS team should be in this tournament. So this thing like, MLS has done so much better this year. They're still withholding teams, right? There's teams that should be in this US Open Cup. So I don't buy that argument that like, oh, MLS has done a favor to have more teams in this year. But totally lost my train of thought now. Sorry where I was going with that. Anyway, when we look at the structure and the Open Cup and moving forward, I think there is that potential for these upsets. And now I remember what I was saying. So when we finished our podcast, I was thinking about coaches may not play their starters, but then nearly, not all, but nearly everybody who's in the Open Cup aren't in another tournament. So they might take this one a little more seriously. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see.
I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see. All right, ready for doing a recap?
Yeah, let's do it. I have a couple that I'm excited to talk about.
Okay, so I have just some things, but why don't you start? Give me your highlights, best match, whatever. What do you got from round one?
I would say the best match in terms of entertainment was also one of my favorite results was El Farolito winning away at Salt Lake City. Rail Monarchs, I guess, which is Salt Lake City, Rail Salt Lake City. Sorry, I can't keep track of their team names. Their MLS Next Pro club. But it was a great game. El Farolito, I think they made the third round last year, playing this very similar. They're very compact, but they have, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but their striker is just an absolute animal. I'm surprised nobody snapped him up after last year. But it was a great game. Both teams had some great opportunities. So that was probably the best game. But in terms of the biggest result for me, well, let's go to individual first of all. Was
Okay.
Xavi Nelati had a brace playing
Yes.
as a striker for Monterey
As the
Bay.
number nine, yeah.
Yeah, and he's actually played there since in the USL Championship play as well. Hasn't scored a goal yet, but I wonder if Monterey sees something in him as a striker.
Yeah, well, we know, I mean, if you've watched any Loyal Select, anything, even though I think we more had him playing the midfield, he certainly can score. He's quick on the ball. And maybe that's part of it, playing a little bit like, yeah, I said striker, but he's probably a little bit more like a false nine, that he's got the freedom to move around and be around the goal and help create. And I am not that familiar with Monterey this year, so I don't know what
Yeah,
the
I
players
don't
are
either.
around him, but if you have the right players and you get good, strong, wide players who can push in also, that leaves him free to make runs inside the box. He's not the tallest player, we know that, so it'll be good. But he does make, just in what I watched there and in what I remember before, he's smart. He makes some good runs. He's dangerous. He's dangerous on the dribble to free people up. So I would more like to see him as a 10.
Yeah,
But maybe
or a
they just don't
second
have anybody
striker.
at Monterey, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. That
he's good at those late runs into the box. I was just listening to Dimitar Berbatov recently talk about
yeah.
why people would always ask him, Dimitar, like, why are you walking? And he said, because I know like when the right time to be there is. Like I'm not like I don't need to run to get there on time. Like I'm walking because that's the pace I need to be at to be in the right place to get the ball to score. And it's a skill that some people just don't have or understand. And I think Xavi, I'm not comparing him to Dimitar Berbatov, but I'm saying he has that ability to just arrive in the
Right.
box at the right time consistently.
Yeah.
Um,
That was, I mean, I caught that game. And that was, just from a loyal perspective, it was great to see a former loyal player
he's
do
probably
quite
the one
well.
I check in on the most, aside from like Duran Ferry and Coque Vegas. Just because he's such a good kid. I want nothing but success for him. And Monterey is a classy club. I love what they're doing over there. So a lot of love for them. But a couple more results I wanted to highlight just so we don't get too stuck
Yeah.
down on anyone. Ballard FC, who is one of
Yes.
USL2's most prominent clubs, and I have a buddy who lived, well, not anymore, but he lived in the Ballard neighborhood during the inception of this team, so I always keep an eye out for them. They lost an almost identical heartbreaker to Spokane Velocity as last year, 1-0 at the end of extra time. So that was a bummer, but it was a great game.
And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
if you watched that game and you watched like the end of it, I mean, that was crazy back and forth. That game could
Yeah.
have been 3-2, 3-1, 2-1, like either way, but it
Well,
was,
and Ballard did score in the 120 something minute, but it was ruled out for offside. So like, yeah,
yeah,
that was a nuts game.
that was a crazy game. That had some, especially the end, that had some excitement to it.
I want to say as well, last year, Ballard was playing some of their home games. I'm not sure all, but some, including their U.S. Open Cup game at Memorial Stadium, which is near the Space Needle in Seattle. It's like a
Mhm.
20,000 seater stadium. So, they have a bigger crowd, but it wasn't the same atmosphere as their normal home stadium where they played this game this past week, Interbay, which is on, I believe, the campus of Seattle University and only holds about 2,500 people. and it's a bumping
Okay.
atmosphere. My buddy, like I said, goes to games. He sent me videos. They're a club I would hope would find a way into the USL promotion pyramid if they could
Right.
wiggle their way in there, because they have a really dedicated fan base and such a great community focused club. I mean, their front of shirt sponsors like a local beer house. It's
Yeah.
anyway. I could go on forever about Ballard, but that was one result. I did watch most of that game. The other big one that jumped out at me before I get to like my main result for this first round was Portland Heart of Pine, Portland, Maine. I believe playing their first ever competitive game.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
going out winning 4-0. That was cool to see. I
I
met.
I
Sorry, go ahead.
love Portland Hearts of Pine
Yeah,
because they remind me. I've been following them loosely, well, more than loosely, but I mean, I've been following them a lot, and they remind me so much of when the Loyal started. The
yes,
the
agreed.
connection that they've tried to make with the community, their kits. I mean, everything about what they're doing is about Portland, Maine, and the community seems to have really bought in to this. So I would love to see them make a little bit of a run and really have a splashy first year, because this is also, a team that could move up this new pyramid within USL. So really, really excited to watch that team more and see how they, just how they evolve, both on the field and within their community, especially.
Yeah, similar feeling. I got a lot of loyal vibes when uh, when I when I first heard about this club and saw what they were doing. Um, and I actually had the pleasure, which is what I'm trying to type while I talk here, um, of meeting somebody who worked for Portland Hearts of Pine at the SDFC first ever home game. And John, I've sent you his email address here if you want to put it up. I'm sure he'd be happy to have me do this. His name was Mark. I don't remember his last name, if I'm being completely honest, but he was a really nice guy. He's from Portland or the metropolitan area, and he just had some really cool stories about this club that hadn't even played a game yet. And he gave me his email address, his club email, and told me to hit him up if I was ever out in Portland, Maine. And so I'm saying if you're ever planning to go to Portland, Maine, we can, put his email address in the show notes. Reach out to Mark. He was a super nice guy, and he said somebody reaches out, he'll get them free tickets to a game, get them set up. So I guess I gotta get out to Portland.
Yeah, yeah, it would be nice. And can you imagine if we get? Well, I mean, it could still happen, but have Portland East Coast, Portland West Coast derby. So
You gotta love it. Well, and I've never been to Portland, Maine, but it's very high on my list. I imagine I would love it. I have a feeling both Portlands would be two of my favorite cities, so I'd be there for that.
yeah,
But anyway, like I mentioned, I did have one particular uh, result I did want to hit on, which was New York Pan Cypriot Freedoms beating
yes,
Cincinnati 2, Alejandro Guido's team, in the first round on penalties. And the reason that's notable, even though it was a 0-0 game and they won on penalties, and by all indications, it was not a terribly exciting game. The New York Pan Cyprian Freedoms have won the U.S. Open Cup 3 times when it was the National Challenge Cup in 1980, 1982, and 1983. They currently, of course, play as an amateur team, but I think that this is one of the things we talked about when we wanted to talk about the Open Cup. This is a
right.
historic U.S. soccer club that has won this damn thing 3 times, who has gotten left behind a little bit in the MLS era. But I think we as a soccer community should do more to respect the history of clubs like this.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's something when we get into some of our US soccer history stuff that we're going to do a little bit later, definitely want to highlight some of these teams that have won the Open Cup and are still around. They still play. And I think if we ever get to a more open pyramid structure, there will be the chance for these clubs to rise again, because the first division isn't closed off from everyone. Now again, right? I mean, even with USL, that's not really what's happening. It's still closed league. It's still just 3 divisions, but hopefully it's the start of something. And I really I'm going to bird walk here back to our pro rel conversation, but I really hope USL just on the men's side just tries to stick with divisions 1, 2, and 3. And I hope that they would open it up to other people to feed in
Yeah.
at some point in the future.
Well, I mean, even if you look at England, that's more or less the model the Football League followed. Obviously, it's a little more
Right.
complex than that, but that is generally speaking how they did it.
Right. And then again, we're kind of bird walking here a little bit, but if you know anything about the history in England, and there's a lot that goes into this, but just in a very simple, but when the league first formed, I don't remember what there were 12-ish teams, and then they kind of merge with someone else and they grow a little bigger, and then they split into a first division and a second division. And then eventually you get like a third division north and a third division south, right? The structure that they have now, I mean, the structure they have is constantly changing. They're constantly tweaking the lower leagues. It's not like it has been this structure for hundreds of years. It's just, they just kept putting things underneath and underneath and underneath, just kind of things to feed in as everything grew. So that'll be when we talk the American promotion, relegation, and the hurdles we have in this country. That's one of the things we'll look at is why some countries have been successful and others haven't, and a lot of that ties into our soccer history. So again, I'll stop there, but that's we'll be talking about that, like I said, in some of our later podcasts.
Absolutely. And I did want to say quickly while we're talking about former U.S. Open Cup winners that deserve more praise, El Farolito did win the U.S. Open Cup in 1993, which we may have mentioned before, but I wanted to make sure we did get on there. It was
not, I don't believe.
The U.S. Open Cup in 1993, I believe. It was no longer the Challenge Cup.
Were they El Farolito then?
I don't believe they were. They were known as Club Deportivo Mexico, I think, but let me confirm that real quick. Yes, in 1993, San Francisco CD Mexico won the U.S. Open Cup, but it is the same club as El Farolito, but it wasn't called that then.
Yeah. So those are some of the things where the names might have changed. That I don't think enough people realize. I know some people realize. I shouldn't generalize. I think there's a lot of people who, I'll say, are ignorant of our soccer culture and history in this country, and not terribly by any fault of their own. I mean, we don't share it. We don't highlight it. There's not many people that talk about it. There's this feeling like soccer started somewhere in the 90s on both the men's and women's side, and then just took off from there. And I think we consider that our modern era, but there is so much rich soccer history. And again, we will dig deeper into some of these conversations as to why things didn't take off the way they did in other countries, because there's some very significant reasons why that happened. And again, we'll get into that later. And, why there's this feeling that it, just started very recently, and why we're in this, owner, like protect the owners at all costs kind of mindset. Those are things, again, we'll cover on a later podcast, but they're important to understand our history and why soccer has had its ups and downs in the last, I don't know, we're talking in this country, our soccer history probably goes back about 150 years.
Way further than most people realize.
Yes. Yeah, we were, I have to go back and check my notes, but there's a couple of things I don't think people realize, that we were second only to England in terms of having them in part of our soccer structure and history. And I would say, in spite of tremendous hurdles, the soccer culture, has thrived and now is really starting to spread its wings. Here we are in 2025. But again, that'll be a bigger conversation for a different podcast.
Absolutely. Before we move on from the first round, though, I did just want to throw out two more cup sets that happened that, we're not going to really spend any time talking about, but we should shout them out. Little Rock Rangers of USL 2, I believe, hosted and beat
Yes.
Birmingham Legion of USL Championship. So that actually might be the biggest cup set that happened in the first round. And then the other one, everybody's favorite team, Des Moines Menace, featuring retired former All-Stars, beat SKC2 on the road 2-1.
Now, I dug in because we had talked about this a little bit, and I don't know if you saw some of the names people had come up for the Des Moines Menace, like Benny and the Vets, and
I had not seen that.
Grumpy
That's
Old
pretty funny,
Menace.
though. It's pretty fun.
So there were some good names that were floating around out there. But I dug in a little deeper because we had talked about in the podcast last week as to like why is it a gimmick? Is it like why are they doing it? And I even asked what about all those players who've kind of been squeezed out of a position? Well, since they play in I don't know if they're in USL2, but they're in one of the leagues that's basically a summer league, and they basically play with college kids. I mean that's their makeup, and you know a lot of their players that they had to qualify for the Open Cup, that helped them qualify, can't, they're unavailable right now because
Right.
they're not
Okay.
as a college student. If they want to maintain their eligibility, they can't participate
Okay.
in these games. So they are short staffed in terms of a roster, like depleted, I think, by half easily. So
I
this was
vaguely
one of the things
recall.
they
Sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say this is one of the things that the coach, however, has the connections, I don't know, but figured, well, why not? Let's go ahead and do it. And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I feel like I also read from the Des Moines Menace side, it was also to point out the problems a little bit with the way the Open Cup is currently structured, because it wasn't always this way with games this early, like
Right.
in March and stuff. But we'd run into the same thing later on if a college team, they could play some of the early rounds, but if they made it far enough, they couldn't play in the later rounds because now they're in their college season. So this is again another problem with our structure, which we'll talk about again on another podcast. But this is what opened up so many spaces, and they had the connections and they got people to come in to play, and they won, right? They beat the SKC2 game. Now I don't know if you watched any of that game.
I watched some of the first half, and it was windy, if I remember correctly.
It was very windy, but the I don't know where the camera was. You're playing in these smaller venues,
Right.
and the setup's not great. And I used to do live streaming for NPSL games here locally in San Diego, and I know what that's like. And you can't control what's going on with the crowd, but the crowd were chanting some things that were
Oh yeah.
it just made me laugh because it's lower league soccer and your
I recall
microphone's right there.
specifically directed at was it Bradley Wright Phillips? Hey Bradley, your head looks cold, because he's bald,
Yeah, they were just
steaming, and
they weren't, well, at least maybe there were some that I'm not remembering, but they weren't terribly offensive. But they, it's a group of, it doesn't sound like more than a dozen people.
Yeah.
And they're just having a good time, and and you could just hear it as loud as the announcers.
Yeah.
The entire
I
match.
did catch a bit of that. That's fun though. That's what we love about this, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is part of the fun of the Open Cup, is you get some of those things.
Yeah.
And great to have all the games on YouTube that you can go back and watch and watch
It
highlights.
is really good. And it makes it really easy too when I have friends that I know are like soccer fans, but maybe aren't like US Open Cup sickos yet.
Right.
Coming for you. It makes it very easy to send them a link and be like, yo, this game is crazy. Throw it on. Because everybody has YouTube. Like, even if you don't have an account, you can watch it. So I very much appreciated US soccer doing that.
Yeah. And I have one more comment about the first round games if you're
Sure.
done, but I want to
I got
finish.
nothing else.
Okay. I don't think there's anything. I'm trying to skim through the games here and the results to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. But one of the things I noticed that, again, I enjoy about the Open Cup, you take a team like El Farolito against Real Monarchs, or the Des Moines Menace and the SK, you know, Sporting Kansas City 2 team. And one of the things that always strikes me is these two teams play with these kids, and the kids are all, I would say, similar in style. You can see what they're looking for in MLS. They're generally big, bigger, taller kids than average kids their age. They have some good, generally technical ability, but they're young, so they lack some tactical awareness. They don't have as many years playing the game as you see some people on like an El Farolito. And what is refreshing to watch is, I think if you really look on paper, like these kids playing for some of these two teams, they're not bad. They have the potential to go, play at a potentially much higher level. A lot of them do, but the the awareness of the game is lacking a little bit. And
Yeah.
you take then some people who are also good, and I'm thinking specifically of the El Farolito team that, I mean, they were constantly pressing. They were much more creative on the ball and less predictable in what they were doing. Whereas, the two teams always feel like they're really trying to implement a style of play, which, frankly, from a coaching standpoint, is what you're trying to do. You want to
Right.
bring them into your first team. So you're not really, there's no two teams that are trying to win the Open Cup. They're not. They're trying to, teach kids to play within a system so that they're ready whenever they're called up for the first team. So I do like seeing some of these styles and differences. You get to see some young kids who have some potential, but I love seeing these sometimes 30-year-olds who are still playing, who love the game and are wily. you they don't
Yeah.
run as fast. They may not quite have the upside that some of these young kids have, but they're good soccer players and they're smart soccer players, and like I said, they're wily. They're smarter about playing the game, and it's just interesting to see those combinations
Well, and
contrast. And
to that point as well, and kind of similarly in the Real Monarch versus Farolito game, you could tell that one of those teams had played together for a long time, and one
yes,
of those teams was a collection of talented individuals.
right,
And I think that, especially when you get down into the lower leagues, you do get that more community focused aspect. And one part of that is that it tends to be players who are more local to the area, even if not specifically from that particular place.
right.
And so you tend to get people playing together for a longer amount of time. And that just makes for more entertaining football, I think,
And
when people know what their teammates are doing, you know?
right, and you get family and friends who come out, which makes it
Right.
more of a community,
And
right?
that
You
one
get
guy
that
who flew to
community
Salt Lake
aspect.
with
Who
the Burrito
the
Bravos flag.
flag the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was great.
Those triceps must have been feeling it.
Yeah, seriously. I never wave the flags at a loyal match,
It's
and
brutal.
I always appreciated the people who did, because I know my body would be suffering for that. So I I don't know how people do that for an entire match, you know.
Yeah, and this is another conversation tangent for another episode, but I think that dichotomy we've just kind of both hit on there is a big part of why I think nobody really gives a shit about MLS Next Pro, and they have no attendance and nobody watches their
Sure.
games. So it's the natural kind of transient nature of those B teams, right? Anyway, sorry, I didn't that again. That's another tangent for another time, but um, I think it's something USL inherently has over MLS Next Pro.
Yeah, it yes, absolutely. And I hope USL doesn't lose that, and I hope that becomes more of a model and a pattern if we do institute pro rel, that these teams do strongly connect with their community instead of,
Absolutely.
again, slight birdwalk, but our protection of ownership model where owners just pick up their teams and move them somewhere else if they're unhappy with the situation. Right. And and this idea that you should be thankful that I dropped a Division 1 team in your lap somewhere, whatever it is, whether it's the NFL or the NBA or anything, you should be thankful to me. I made this happen
It's funny that you
instead of
mentioned those two aspects of it because as a San Diego Loyal fan and an Oakland Athletics fan, I've experienced both ends of that billionaire
yeah, yes, you
being
have.
being fucked over in the last year or so. So yeah, it's nice to have people who aren't doing that.
Yes, always. And again, we're going to dive into that a little more deeply
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
another
Another
episode.
time. Well, shall
Okay.
we discuss the second round?
Yeah, let's talk about second round. What do you got?
Well, I would say that there's been a few that have jumped out at me. First and foremost, Monterey are hosting El Farolito, so those are unfortunately probably the two teams I'm most rooting for remaining, but I suppose that guarantees one of them goes through to the third round. That'll be in Seaside, so that should be a good matchup. Portland Hearts of Pine will be hosting Hartford. Uh, who knows? We'll see if they can dish out another spanking at home in the Open Cup. And then the big one for me that I
Hartford, from what I've seen, looks pretty good. So they're not the
okay, no, they're not the Hartford of the loyal days, are
they're not the Hartford of old. Yeah.
they? No. Okay.
Um,
Well, who knows?
but yeah, I'm always for the cup set, pretty
Yeah,
much. Since
absolutely.
I certainly don't have a team in the fight anymore, I'm cup set all the way. So I will be pulling for Portland Hearts of Pine in that one.
Um, yeah, I would agree with that. The next game I wanted to mention is actually probably the perfect game to discuss vis-a-vis the USL still having issues even if they implement ProRel, and that's the Chattanooga FC versus Chattanooga Red Wolves game, which is actually the most specific instance of USL territory rights screwing over a really
Yes.
community and fan-focused club. So we don't have to dive in on that, but will you be
Yeah.
watching that
Yes, we're
one?
diving in.
All right, let's do it.
Um, yeah, this game is, I think, in a nutshell, a microcosm of almost everything wrong with US soccer. I mean, when you look
Yes.
at the trajectories and the histories of these two clubs, and I think I read somewhere, let me rephrase that. I think that I read somewhere that this is the first time competitively they are ever playing against each other.
I'm
So
fairly confident that's correct. Yeah.
I definitely want to see this. And for people who may not know the history, Chattanooga, not the Red Wolves, um, but Chattanooga itself, they have been, I would say, up until the last few years when they went MLS Next Pro, because a lot of people felt they were selling out. They, along with maybe Detroit City, had kind of been the poster child of the real independent soccer club movement. They were both instrumental in the founding of NISA. Now, NISA in 2025 is very different than NISA pre-operation. I mean, NISA had a lot of good things it was trying to do, and it's another thing we'll uncover in our soccer history. Um, but the intent of what NISA was trying to do, I think, was admirable. But what happened right before they launched, and again, without going into all the details, would just really mess things up. And then it was almost a shit show from the very beginning in terms of structure and operations for the league. And, so if you look at it from a NISA standpoint of trying to implement ProRel, which was one of their goals, and all the things they were doing with NISA Nation. And here you have this team that started moving forward and was successful. And, you take Detroit City, and they ended up going into USL, which a lot of people thought they were sellouts for going into the championship as well. But, um, you have this Chattanooga team that is now an MLS Next Pro, which is MLS attempt at, I I would argue, MLS's attempt at really trying to suffocate USL.
I would agree.
especially at the moment that they agreed to form MLS Next Pro, which, I mean, can you imagine if all those two teams were playing in League One, which is about where they should be,
Hmm.
and you had this robust League One with all these teams, along with all the other teams that are there? But again, another conversation. And then the Chattanooga Red Wolves are the USL side. They're the USL 1 side. They were originally in Real Salt Lake, I believe, and that's where the franchise, whatever. And the team got moved to Chattanooga by the USL specifically to try to compete against the independent Chattanooga team. Like, this is when, again, as much as I like USL and some of the things they've done, USL has done some shitty things to other teams, to the way MLS has done shitty things to USL teams. And this is, that Chattanooga team, that Red Wolves team, was specifically placed in Chattanooga to try to undermine the independent Chattanooga team. And again, this is like, you talk about soccer wars, it's all contained between these two teams in this match. There's so much backstory of how each of them got to where they are in 2025, why they're there. As you said, gets into the territory rights. And because of the territory rights, when the independent Chattanooga team had a chance to come in, possibly to the USL fold and leave NISA, they couldn't. They couldn't because the Red Wolves were there. And that was a huge one. Now, that might be a little bit of a technical thing because I think there's also some bad blood there that prevented the move anyway. But again, this is where we're back into these leagues fighting leagues instead of teams sorting it out on the field, because there's a structure that allows you to move up and move down.
Yeah. And I want to say too, and I think that, this kind of takes a more backseat view of the soccer wars, if you will, but something that the closed league and the territory rights and all that nonsense prevents are these very real, visceral,
Yeah.
emotional local derbies. I I think it was on BlueSky. Shout out BlueSky. I saw some Detroit City FC fan talking about how the games they would most like to be seeing are against their other local Detroit area teams, other or like
Right.
nearby cities. And even with promotion and relegation in the USL, that still can't happen with territory rights. And so it's preventing the best part of the sport. I mean, it anyway. Again, we could really just go in on this, but it's just another reason to think territory rights are stupid, I guess is what I'm saying.
I would imagine that as part of this move forward, the USL will, um, they may not eliminate territory rights completely. Like, maybe they'll put a limit. There can only be two teams in one area, but I imagine that's something that they will tweak. I would
Yeah,
hope
I would
they'd get
agree.
rid of it completely. Um, but yeah, these local derbies are what you want,
Yeah,
and they make for entertain. I mean, again, we both have made comments like this before, and we'll probably make them lots of other times. The closest thing to worldwide soccer in terms of passion and rivalries and derbies that we see is college athletics.
yeah,
And why? Because you have local rivalries. And frankly, what we're losing in the college sport right now is with these conference realignments, is we're losing those local derbies. It's
yeah,
not as interesting anymore when, you have, I'm just thinking of women's college basketball with USC and UCLA not in the Pac-10, right? Playing against each other in a championship conference game on the East Coast.
yeah,
So
yeah. And
it
and on another example just from the other day, Oregon and Arizona men's basketball teams played each other in the round of 32 in the men's tournament. And it was noticeably more entertaining than most of the other games in that round because that used to be, I mean, local, air quotes, like American local
right.
rivalry. That was a Pac 12 rivalry, Pac 10, not Pac 8, but Pac 10, Pac 12 rivalry. So, I agree with you. We're losing it. Seeing Cal football playing conference rivals, University of Miami, was very strange this past year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're it in again, this goes to the way we protect, and it's not quite the same in college, but same idea. We protect owners and protect the money and the investment.
Yeah, it is the
There
same if you just phrase it as protecting entrenched
Yeah,
monetary interests. It's not an individual in the same way, but it's the same idea.
right. And it's people chasing the money and reworking the system to try to maximize their ability to pull money off of it, to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
corporatize
absolutely.
things. But again, we're talking
Absolutely.
that's another podcast.
Well, so anyway, to circle back, I will be watching that game. That's April 2nd. So let's see,
Yeah.
that's next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow at 4 o'clock our time. And I will be rooting for Chattanooga FC, even though I would generally consider myself a fan of the USL. You got to root for the independent club and the cup set there, I would think. Um,
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
think that one's tough again because of the soccer wars.
Yeah.
I normally, like you said, would lean USL in terms of a USL MLS matchup, and
Hmm.
The independent Chattanooga side is now MLS Next Pro. So you know I have a like I really don't want either of them to win, but but I've always really disliked the Chattanooga Red Wolves as an entity, first and foremost, because they relocated. They moved from
Hmm.
somewhere else to be there. And the reason
Hmm.
they moved was to undermine an existing successful team.
It's double
Those
shitty.
things as much as I might lean USL in a lot of things, that's more USL versus MLS. But if I love the idea behind NISA of what they were trying to do initially, back when Peter Wilt originally proposed everything. But because of what happened there and him being out of it and other people taking it over, like I said, NISA's just been a shit show. The
Yeah.
this whole time they don't pay players. Like I understand why the independent Chattanooga team left. So I hope for a good game, but it's one of these things where I have a hard time picking someone I'd really like to see or have the cup set because I'm not happy with in this case. This is one of USL's like worst things about USL that they've done.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a long time before they ever live this down, short of getting rid of territorial rights and opening things up and maybe pulling an independent Chattanooga team back into the fold.
Yeah.
Um,
I normally would agree with you. It would be an easy decision, USL team over MLS Next Pro team. But in this instance, I don't even hold the MLS Next Pro thing against CFC to the point that I actually forgot they were in MLS NP until you mentioned it. Because they the way I see it, they were left with no other choice. NISA was crumbling. USL wouldn't let them in.
right.
What else were they to do? You know, so I really I don't even hold that against them. I hold them being an MLS Next Pro against the USL. So I will be easily
Absolutely.
rooting for CFC in that game personally.
Yeah.
But there are other games that I'd like to mention. So if you, unless you have anything else on that game you
No,
want us
no.
to touch on.
Go ahead.
So there are four more that have caught my eye. So the next one is Westchester Soccer Club of League One
Right.
hosting our favorite New York Pan Cyprian Freedoms.
Correct.
That is also on the second at 4 p.m. So we'll have to do a double screen on that, I suppose. The next is Madison FC hosting, or Forward Madison FC, excuse me, host of League One hosting Tulsa of the championship. So potential cup set there. And part of the reason I wanted to shout this out is because I think Madison consistently have some of the best like logos and jerseys in all of U.S.
Right.
soccer. And their stadium, Breese Stevens Field, is like an old converted baseball stadium, and it's very neat. It's very like lower league U.S. soccer. I've never been, but I always make a point to watch those games if I can, just because I think it's a neat venue. So that's a game if you can tune in. That's April 2nd, 4:30. So We got 3 games in that block now. I don't know. Get your multi-screen ready.
Yes.
Um, Another one at 4:30 on the second. Naples FC. I believe they are either League One or lower, even hosting Little Rock Rangers of USL 2. So depending on my memory of where Naples FC are, that could be. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to look it up right now.
And
Anyway, that's. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in FC Naples, one of their owners is Nico Cantor.
That's
One
right.
of
I
the
knew I'd heard that name before. Okay,
well,
so they
the
are in
Cantor
League One.
family, not just Nico Cantor,
Sure,
but the
sure.
Cantor family.
So they are USL League One. So that's a League One hosting League Two team. So maybe not as big of a cup set there, but like I said, I think Little Rock Rangers had probably the most notable cup set last round, beating a championship
Right.
team. And then the last game, Des Moines Menace hosting Omaha. That's at 5:30 on Wednesday, April 2nd. So unfortunately, all 5 of these games we picked out are like right at the same time. But that is, I think, a big chance for an upset. But Omaha are a bit of giant killers themselves. So that could be a wild game.
That was probably, besides the Chattanooga Derby, that was probably the game I picked
Yeah,
out.
it's
That would be,
certainly a
that
lot of
could be a really
stories.
good game. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's lots of good stories here. I love the Westchester SC and the New York Pansy Freedoms because, again, like you said, the history and everything there. Would love to see an amateur team go a little further and deeper in the tournament, but all the games, like we said, these are Wednesday. There's just 2 next week. The games are just on Tuesday and Wednesday. So we'll
okay.
have,
Yeah, I see
I
that.
think,
It's
four,
mostly Wednesday, it looks like, as well.
yeah, three games on Tuesday. The rest of the games, 5 games on Wednesday.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. It's a good recap. I'm looking forward to the games for next week and see who makes it. And then we'll bring in the championship teams, USL championship. Um, and that will change things because I think will all get matched up against.
And so those are the seeded teams, right? So those are the teams that made the playoffs last year.
I believe so. I'm not sure if it's just the ones who made the playoffs, but yeah, I think basically it's those teams. But that'll be nice. We'll bring those in, and then and that round won't be for, I don't know. Is it May or is it later in April? I can't remember now
I think they
when round
usually, the
3
first 3
is.
rounds are pretty rapid.
Yeah, I agree. It probably is the first 3, and then I think we'll probably go 2 weeks. So we'll have the round 2 next week. I know we could look it up here, but then a couple weeks after that should be round 3, and then I think we jump to May before we get to the next round.
Sweet.
All right. Okay. Well, I have one closing thing I want to add, but
Sure. Yeah.
before I add my closing homework assignment for people, do you have any last things you want to say about the Open Cup before we start wrapping things up here?
No, nothing really. Just that it is really fun. I have a group chat that I do for March Madness, which just started this past weekend, with a bunch of old friends and people who those friends have met and added. It's like 20 people now, but it's fun. It's $10. It's not very serious, but the Wednesday night when we were all getting ready to having our group chat, talking our shit, I asked if anybody else was a U.S. Open Cup sicko in that group chat, and I actually got a few people responding about it. So it was fun to kind of
Excellent.
chat with some people I didn't know about it, and hopefully get some of those other people in that group chat wondering like, oh, tournament sports, that's the vibe I'm on. Maybe this is something I could check out too.
Right.
So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is indoctrinate your friends, proselytize the U.S. Open Cup.
There you go. All right. As we wrap up here, I want to mention a podcast. It's called It Was What It Was. It's a British podcast, and they focus on football history. And recently, and I listen to it occasionally. I can't say I listen to it every week, but they have some very good. There's a couple one of the journalists, Jonathan Wilson, who writes about soccer. He's written books, and off the
He
top of
wrote
my head
Inverting
now,
the
I
Pyramid, which is
thank
like
you.
the
Yes,
Bible of soccer tactics, in my opinion.
right. Yeah, I was blanking out on some of the books that he's written. He's written quite a few, um, and he loves history, and football history. Well, they've just done, and the third episode just came out, I think today. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet or listen to it yet. Um, but it's a three-part series they've done on the history of soccer in the United States. And they make a distinction to call it soccer, to separate it from American football when they're having this conversation. And it is um, it ties in a lot to some of the things we're going to be talking about later. But I strongly encourage people, if you have a chance, each episode is an hour ish, and they're really only taking their look, at least through these three episodes, which to my knowledge are the only three that they have planned to do, at least at the moment, really looking at the inception of soccer in the United States. Like when did it officially start, which was, we're talking really kind of within a decade of when it officially started. And officially start, I mean, that's when we think of when do the rules get codified, right? That you start playing by a more standard rules. And these are something we're going to talk about when we do our history stuff later. But, I think they do a very good job of looking at the first episode. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I listened to them back to back, those first two ones. Really goes from the inception till about, I don't know, 1920s ish. And then they kind of pick up from there up to about, really, it's only a few years in the second podcast. They really look at the rise and the success of soccer when soccer is getting 12,000, 15,000, 30,000 fans to come out and watch matches. And then this third episode, which I'm excited to listen to, because it's interesting hearing the British take on American soccer, because I think there's quite a few things I would have phrased or maybe looked at through a slightly different lens. But I think, if you want something that would be supplemental to some of the things we're going to talk about as well, but it is done by some very educated, soccer educated people, in England, kind of looking at the history. And really, Jonathan Wilson is leading this discussion, and his partner in the podcast is kind of like dumbfounded a little bit a lot of times of like, I had no idea it was this popular. I had no idea there were this many things going on. I had no idea, right? And I think for a lot of Americans, it's probably the same thing that people would think when they listen to this. I had no idea there was this rich tradition and history and things that happened. And this third episode is where it all kind of fell apart. So I don't know how far along they take it because I haven't listened to it yet. But first two episodes were really good. A lot of the stuff I knew just because I'm a little bit of a history nerd on things along these lines, but they also brought up some things that I hadn't really considered before. Also, as what's going on in the world that also helped contribute to why we did things the way we did in the United States. So I strongly recommend that podcast. It's called "It Was What It Was." Jonathan Wilson is the main historian for that and researcher and bringing that information in. The third podcast, I believe, just came out, or the third part in this series just came out. But this is part of a bigger podcast, but they mostly focus on what happens in Britain, through soccer history. So they shine their lens on the U.S., and I'm glad they did. I think it's the timing is really good, especially for some of the things we're looking at doing coming up over the next few months with our podcast. So if you haven't checked it out before, go ahead and check it out. It Was What It Was. You can find it on all your podcast services and look for the three episodes about U.S. soccer.
I will check that out. I've not heard about that.
All right. yeah, so that's instead of a question of the week this week, it's your homework assignment for the week. So go
Oh, that's from
watch or
the
go.
overlap. Okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah.
All
The
right, familiar.
overlaps the group,
Sure, gotcha. Okay,
but yeah, it was what it was is the name of the podcast, and it's been good. I've enjoyed their other ones too, but this is specifically about the United States, and since we are looking at grassroots soccer, and again more specifically for the United States because of our focus, I think it's a great 3 episode segment to listen to get some background that people may not be aware of about our rich soccer culture and soccer history in this country.
cool. We'll give it a listen.
All right. So again, no question of the week, homework assignment of the week to go listen to the
Sure.
podcast
I've
episodes.
got 2 flights I'll be on this week, so that's perfect.
All right, excellent. Um, okay, well, Dylan, I know you're going to be traveling, so I hope you get to listen to that. We'll have the Open Cup next week, and we'll be back again next week. Not sure what our topic is going to be just yet for next week, but
Well, I'll probably have the Open Cup on in the background either way. So
yeah, we'll sort that out. We have a couple other guests we're trying to get on, so from again some of our previous episodes, and I know you got some work requirements to do over this next week, Dylan, and I gotta make a more serious stab at this SanDiego.futbol episode because I'm behind where I wanted to be, so we can get this wrapped up and put out, and then we can get the SanDiego.futbol guys on the podcast.
sounds good.
Yeah. All right. So once again, what are we about? Oh, we're a bit after 6. Again, we partner with SanDiego.futbol. If you haven't listened to it yet, Monday nights, 8 o'clock, is the Two Balls and a Mic podcast. Check them out every week. They've been going for 5 years straight, haven't missed a single week with their podcast. And you could probably tune in if you're watching live right now and shift over to the Soccer's Overtime podcast, which started probably about 15 minutes ago. So you can probably catch the end of that. Otherwise, you can find us on BlueSky and BlueSky only for our podcast and for soccer shorts. So in terms of social media, we're only on BlueSky. It's soccershorts.bigpinedigital.com, and you can find the Soccer Shorts YouTube channel at BPD, that's short for Big Pine Digital, at BPD Soccer Shorts, and that's where you can find all the previous Soccer Shorts episodes. All right, Dylan, any last comments before we head out?
Yeah, I just, you reminded me of this talking about the Brits talking about American soccer. To our listeners, don't ever let a British person make you feel bad about calling it soccer. I use soccer and football interchangeably, but British people came up with the word soccer. They gave the world the word soccer. Don't ever let British people make you feel bad about calling it soccer.
Yeah, I don't know why people make such a big deal of it either way. Even Americans defending that you have to call it soccer.
People are weird.
I'm like you. I use it interchangeably, and it probably depends on the context a little
100%. And who you're talking to as well.
Sure. Yeah. I don't,
Anyway, I just wanted to get that in there because I like poking British people's fun about it. So.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you very much for the conversation tonight, and looking forward to whatever we decide our topic's going to be for next week,
good.
whether we have guests or not. So we'll see everyone in a week, and enjoy your soccer.